Hello and welcome to Just Books. It's the weekly show that takes you into the world of readers, writers and the latest publishing trends. But first, a quick look at what's on our bookshelf today. Pakistani author Musharraf Ali Farooqi on his new novel, Between Clay and Dust. Best-selling author Ashwin Sanghi on his favorite reading list. What's doing brisk business in the bookshops and who's shaking the bestseller charts? Here's a quick look at the week's bestsellers. A racy historical thriller based on the life of the strategist who helped establish the Mauryan dynasty. Chetan Bhagat's fifth novel set in Varanasi is a predictable love triangle with Bollywood overtones. The second part of the best-selling trilogy is set 4,000 years ago in Shiva's quest to confront a Naga warrior. Set in 1900 BC in the Indus civilization with a cast of early Vedic gods, its principal character is the evolution of Shiva as a hero. And from the best-selling thriller writer, a new novel that moves between Bristol and Manhattan, crossed lovers and false identities. A remarkable account of everyday life in a Mumbai slum by a Pulitzer Prize-winning American journalist. The feel-good handbook to robust health, wisdom and blissful happiness. A tracing of the Bollywood idol's rise to stardom, focusing on his 21 landmark hits. The complete authorized biography of the charismatic revolutionary figure who transformed the digital world. And from the best-selling harbinger of a joyful life, how to interpret the hidden meanings of sacred words to transform your life. And here's my pick of 5 new titles in the bookshops this week. From the well-known investment analyst, an engrossing journey to developing countries that will chart the course of the world's economic future. A best-selling thriller that is being hailed as Japan's answer to Stieg Larsson. As chicklit goes, this one, set in the power centers of Indian media, bureaucracy and politics, is a racy weekend read. A collaboration between a planning commission member and a journalist that charts the troubled stories of the poor and disadvantaged in the Indian heartland. And a TV journalist and actor's foray into the world of terrorist threat and the forces that combat its horror. And in our ongoing series, What's on My Bookshelf, Ashwin Sanghi, author of the best-selling CHANAKYA'S, CHANTS, a fictionalized retelling of the life of the master strategist, now about some of his favorite books.
Hi, my name is Ashwin Sanghi and I'm the author of the Rosabal line and CHANAKYA'S chant. I happen to be in my study, which is where I do most of my writing and most of my reading. I today want to talk to you a little bit about the books that have specifically inspired me, the books that have influenced me, not only in terms of my writing, but also in terms of my life. And so one of the first books that I'd like to talk to you about is the one which inspired my very last book, which is the Arthashastra. And I knew nothing actually about the Arthashastra or Chanakya or Kautilya till the time that I actually got down to reading this. And it's one of the most fascinating pieces of history that I have ever read. And it is one of those books which talks about how wide should a chariot road be. He talks about what are the principles of good taxation. He talks about how a king's army should be managed. How deep should a treasury be so that burglars can't loot it. How should even the liquor and drinking taverns be managed. This is a book that you just have to read if you haven't read it. So the next book that is on my list is this particular one. It's called Jesus Lived in India, and it's written by Holger Kirsten. And of course, this is not a recent book. It's a very old book. I think it was first published sometime maybe around 1981, it was the early 1980s. But I read it sometime during the late 1980s, and it is the book that got me interested in the topic that Jesus may have survived the crucifixion, that he may have traveled to India, that he may possibly have also studied in India. All of those were the topics that I got interested in. So if you haven't read Jesus Lived in India, then I suggest you get a copy of it, because it's an incredible, it's a mind-blowing book. One of my all-time favorites, Sherlock Holmes. You know, I mean, this is the book that honestly taught me that plot is everything. So that's one of the reasons why when I sit down to write a book, I'll spend 3 months working on a plot before I actually get down to writing a single word. This was one of those collections that was passed on to me by my grandfather. My grandfather was a person who would send me a book every week. And he used to tell me that, you know, beta, you can do business all you want, but business will feed your stomach. It will never feed your soul. And that's what books do. They feed your soul. So for those of you who haven't enjoyed Arthur Conan Doyle or have just satisfied yourselves with the TV series, I strongly recommend that you try and read the original version. And in fact, you have the entire collection available in a single book. Well, what else? Yes, this is a book that I have to talk to you about. Vikram Chandra, one of my favorite authors. And of course, Sacred Games was actually the book that inspired me to write Indian fiction. It's a book which made me realize that it was possible to write for an Indian audience and be rooted in India, and to talk about stories that could tug at our heartstrings and could be relevant to us. This story is nothing short of an epic. So for those of you who haven't read Sacred Games, it's a book which once you start reading, you're not going to put it down. So even though it looks immensely huge, and I'm given to understand that the author spent maybe 7 or 8 years writing it, let me tell you, it's not going to take you more than a couple of days to read it, because you won't be able to put it down once you start. And of course, one of my all-time favorites, The Complete Yes Minister, and of course followed up by Yes Prime Minister. This, in fact, to a very great extent, was my favorite reading during the late 1980s, and it introduced me to the world of Westminster and the funny side of politics. It's just full of laughs, full of gags. So again, strong recommendation, do read it. Well, I would suggest that for those of you who are currently watching this television program, a great idea would be shut the telly and put on a nice, pick up a nice book and put on a nice music track and sink in, immerse yourself, enjoy. Have a great weekend.
Pakistani author Musharraf Ali Farooqi is a man of many parts, novelist, translator and children's story writer. His new novel is called Between Clay and Dust, a masterly fiction set in the life of an inner city just after partition. Up ahead, Musharraf Ali Farooqi on Between Clay and Dust. Karachi-based Canadian writer Musharraf Ali Farooqi is in Delhi to launch his remarkable new novel, Between Clay and Dust, a first offering from David Devidar's new Aleph Book Company. Musharraf, it's a tiny novel, Between Clay and Dust, set in sort of mid-20th century, shortly after partition, and it takes us into the heart of no, not so much a Pakistani city as a dying old culture. It's really a kind of contest or a confrontation between two powerful characters who represent this dying culture, a Pahalwan called Ustad Ramzi, who represents or presides over this huge akhara, and a beautiful courtesan called Gohar Jan, who presides over a kota. What took you into the inner city of the subcontinent at that period, and to really investigate and explore the identities behind these two declining cultures?
Really, it started with an abstract notion of, exploring the relationship that a wrestler has with his self-discipline and, control of his strength and physical power. And from there, it became the story of Ustad Ramzi, and slowly entered Gohar Jan with her own sphere of expression, which was, the kota. And their lives became intertwined, and the choices that were offered them, to both these artists at a certain stage in their lives and their careers were almost identical. And I wanted to show and attempt to show how the same quality of choices and same kind of choices can be interpreted very differently by people, having this exact same kind of relationship with their art, and the same integrity and same passion for their art.
Right, as I said, it's a post-partition story. The cataclysm of partition has happened. The old culture of the inner city and the old culture of the arts, of physical perfection, as in the sphere or the theatre of both the kota and the akhara, of the Pahalwans and the Tawaifs, is dying. It's declining. But you build up these two amazing characters at the pinnacle of their power and beauty and talent, very carefully, and then show them in their tragic decline. How did you fashion Gohar Jan, the courtesan, and Ustad Ramzi, the Pahalwan?
Ustad Ramzi and Gohar Jan are both names, historic names, but
they're true.
They're true. I mean, these names exist in the Pahalwan culture and in the courtesan culture. And of course, we all know Gohar Jan, a historic character. But I just took these names because I thought the name of Gohar Jan conveyed the kind of personality I wanted to portray in this story, and so did the name of Ustad Ramzi. It had a certain sound to it, which I liked. Slightly a slightly uncommon name. These days, but still not completely foreign. So that was the idea, and the story really is about how we interpret our relationship to arts and our relationship with human beings. And by just slightly tapering them off in one direction makes all the change, in the life of one character, and a different equation in the person's life.
It's a relationship of great formality.
It is.
One would think that running a kota or an akhara would be in some ways a graphic or explicit culture, but it's a culture where emotions and indeed attractions are kept very sternly in check.
Yes. You see, one factor is the age of these characters. They're at a certain point in their lives. But also, the story that I wanted to tell had really nothing to do with physical emotions. I mean, it's completely about the inner lives and the inner struggle which we have with our emotions, with the kinds of choices which are given to us at difficult times.
Between Clear and Dust brings to mind two very amazing classics of Urdu and English literature. Ahmad Ali's Twilight in Delhi, which deals with the same culture but at another slightly earlier period, and in the 19th century, of course, Ahmed Hassan Ruswa's Umrao Jan. Many people think Umrao Jan, the courtesan, was a real character, but of course she's entirely a figment of a great writer's fictional imagination. And there is that sense in Clay and Dust, between Clay and Dust, of the story being told in the tradition of a dastan. Do you agree?
Yes,
it's a fable-like quality.
Yes, and I had this discussion with my editor, and I said, Bob, this is a fable. And he said, well, fable has animals. And I said, yes, but more in the tradition of a parable, or, you know. But we did agree that, you know, this is not a novelistic narrative in the modern sense. It has more of this narrative quality, heavy narrative voice, which I thought was necessary to tell this story. And the number of drafts that I went through, I kept coming back to the same narrative voice, and I told myself, you know, that this story can really not be told in any other voice.
Well, it's beautifully told. Also, I think the beauty of Between Clay and Dust is its brevity. It's told in 25 very short chapters. It's a novel less than 200 pages. And one of the interesting things about it is that in some ways its construction is very much like your earlier novel, The Story of a Widow, set in Karachi. It came out some years ago, much applauded. You were hailed as the Jane Austen of the subcontinent. But again, what's very interesting in The Story of a Widow is that the external surroundings don't matter much. Karachi, or its external life, is a bit of a blur, as it is the city, the old city, declining, changing, decaying, is a bit of a blur again in between Clay and Dust. It's the characters, their conversations, that completely take over. Is that part of your design as a fiction writer?
Yes, because in what I read, I try to read about human relationships. You know, that's what interests me, really.
And their intricacy.
Yes, yes. That's why I love Japanese writers like Tanizaki, because, you know, their whole work is geared towards human relationships and, you know, it's exploration.
The Makioka sisters.
The Makioka sisters.
Is that a source of inspiration?
Absolutely, for The Story of a Widow. I've mentioned it countless times that, you know, that because I haven't read a single Jane Austen novel, although I've seen the movies, so I don't know what the story is. But Makioka sisters was what, you know, provided justification for the kind of world and the setup and, you know, the surroundings for The Story of a Widow. So yes, the inner lives of characters are what, you know, always intrigue me and, you know, make me attempt to explore them.
Right. What's also very exciting about the range of your writing, and there is tremendous range because you, after all, are a professional translator of Urdu and Persian classics, 19th century classics. Amir Hamza's massive epic has been translated. You also write children's short stories very successfully. Is that from your background of linguistic study, and you immerse yourself, I hear, in dictionaries, comes a kind of bilingual voice? You are utterly at ease in two languages, in the Urdu tradition and in the English tradition. Would it be accurate to say that renders the inner lives, gives it a delicate nuance that would be difficult to attain in English otherwise?
Perhaps yes, because you see, these people about whom I've written in these two novels, you know, The Story of a Widow and Between Clay and Dust, they conduct their life in a certain idiom, in a certain language, which is not English. And
their thoughts, their emotions, yes, their feelings, even their physical movements are dictated by the constraints of language.
Yes. So I had to write a kind of language in which whatever they say and whatever they feel in their, you know, in their lives, in their hearts, sounds authentic in English language.
And how much hard work is that? How long did it take you to capture that or pare that down in so succinctly and brilliantly in such a tiny novel like Between Clay and Dust?
Between Clay and Dust took me 10 years to write, a little more than 10 years perhaps. and
many revisions,
many revisions.
drafts.
Yes, and I kept coming back to, you know, it was maybe a little longer in one of its earlier versions, but I really thought that the real story, or the, you know, the kernel of the story was really the relationship between you know, or the, you know, the lives of Ustad Ramzi and Gohar Jan, and, you know, how they dealt with, you know, people whom they loved. And that, you know, really could be told in a very condensed way if it was told in a particular fashion. And, you know, that particular fashion is not, you know, that particular narrative is not a modern sort of, you know, narrative. It is an old world narrative, because, you know, this is an old world story. And but at the same time, I don't think that it's oppressive. It's not oppressive to read. It's, you know,
it has a very great fluency.
Yes, so that was, you know, the whole effort, you know, make it sound, you know, just let the story flow naturally, and, you know, that's not sometimes easy to.
Quick class question to this great, fantastic pageant of remarkable Pakistani writers, Muhammad Hanif, Mohsin Hamid, Kamila Shamsi, Daniel Moinuddin is now added the name of Musharraf Ali Farooqi, indelibly so. How is it that there is such a remarkable stream of original talent and creative talent in its many manifestations, particularly in fiction, coming out of Pakistan? I'm sure it's a question you've been asked before and will be asked again.
Yes,
still.
yes. There is a lot of fiction being written both in English and Urdu. And because I mostly seek out and read Urdu contemporary fiction, I'd like to mention two other names. One is Ali Akbar Natiq. Another writer is Khalid Toor. Khalid Toor is a more senior personality. Akbar Natiq is quite young, in his perhaps early 30s. And their stories are really remarkable and amazing, and I think they are as good as any of, you know, the best contemporary writers writing anywhere.
Well, I hope you will, as a professional translator, you will translate these lesser known names from Urdu, but meanwhile, Musharraf Ali Farooqi, I beg you, don't stop writing in English for larger audiences. I think Between Clay and Dust is really a little gem. It's to be treasured, savored, and really enjoyed again. It's a brilliant novel. Thank you so much for being on the show to talk about it. That's all for now, but I'll be back next weekend with another edition of Just Books. Until then, from all of us here at NDTV, goodbye.